I thought my fiancé ghosting me at the altar would be the worst day of my life. Little did I know that I would be marrying the love of my life that day. Part 1. Left in lace. The air beneath the pad-draped arch hung thick with the scent of crushed petals and fragile hope. Sunlight filtered through the sheer canopy overhead, dappled Lila Moreno's ivory gown, and turned her carefully arranged blonde curls into a luminous halo. She clutched the bouquet of blush roses and trailing ivy, her knuckles white beneath the delicate lace of her gloves. A tremor ran through the stems, not from nerves, she told herself fiercely, but from the sheer overwhelming joy that threatened to burst from her chest. This was it, the culmination of every dream whispered into her pillow since girlhood. The string quartet nestled amidst a bower of ferns and white hydrangeas drew a collective breath. The familiar tender opening notes of the processional swelled, washing over the assembled guests like a blessing. 200 faces blurred by happy tears and the sheer brilliance of the day swiveled towards her. Smiles bloomed like the peonies above. Mothers dabbed at eyes. Uncles straightened eyes. Friends leaned forward in anticipation. Lila's own smile was incandescent. She felt like captured sunshine radiating a love so profound it felt almost indecent. Her heart wide open and beating a frantic tattoo against her ribs was a beacon. He was waiting for her at the end of this pedestal path. Her future. She took the first step, the silk of her gown whispering secrets against the pristine white runner. The quartet played on the melody soaring. She focused on the space beneath the arch, where the officiant stood, serene and expectant, where he should be standing beside him, tall and handsome in his mourning suit, his eyes fixed only on her. Except he wasn't. A beat passed. The music flowed, unchallenged. Lila took another step, her smile faltering only slightly. Perhaps he was adjusting his cufflinks, giving his tie one final nervous tweak. The guests nearest the front began to shift, their initial expressions of delight morphing into polite confusion. Murmurs started soft at first, like rustling leaves, then gaining volume. As the quartet, sensing the discord, hesitated, the melody stuttered, then died in a discordant sigh. Lila stopped. The bouquet trembled violently in her grasp, now the roses suddenly seeming heavy as stone. Her gaze wide and searching swept the space beside the officiant. Empty. She scanned the front row. His parents sat rigid, his mother's face pale as parchment, her father staring fixedly at his polished shoes. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at Lila's throat. Where was he to joke? A terrible last-minute stumble. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The beautiful garden. Moments ago, a scene of perfect bliss felt suddenly exposed. The bright sunlight, harsh and unforgiving, whispers became distinct phrases. Where's Logan? Did something happen? Is this part of it? Lila felt the heat of 100 stares. No longer adoring, but pitying, curious, horrified. The radiant joy curdled into a sickening dread that pulled in her stomach. Her carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. Then movement, not from the expected direction, but from the side. A figure detached itself from the shadow of a towering magnolia tree, cutting a sharp, dark line through the pastel perfection of the wedding. Avery Sloane, she moved with a predatory grace. Her sleek black suit, a stark, deliberate contrast to the sea of spring colors and ivory lace. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing the sharp angles of her face. The storm brewing in her gray eyes. The whispers intensified, shocked gasps punctuating the heavy air as she strode purposefully toward Lila, ignoring the officiant, ignoring the bewildered guests. Her gaze locked solely on the trembling bride. Avery stopped mere inches away. The scent of expensive, icy perfume cut through the floral sweetness. Up close, Lila could see the fury simmering beneath Avery's controlled exterior. The tightness around her mouth. She leaned in, her voice alone, velvet-wrapped blade meant only for Lila's ears, yet carrying in the sudden deathly quiet of the garden. You don't deserve this, Avery stated, each word precise and chilling. Her eyes flickered over Lila's devastated face, the tears welling in her wide blue eyes. The bouquet, now crushed against her chest like a shield. A flicker of something almost like sympathy, ruthlessly suppressed, crossed Avery's features before hardening again. But he doesn't deserve you either. The words landed like physical blows. They acknowledged the brutal humiliation, the shattering of Lila's world, but twisted it into something else entirely. A condemnation not of Lila, but of the man who should have been standing there. Avery's stare gripped Lila's hard and unbreaking, a rope tossed not out of kindness, but from a deep, searing fury Lila couldn't yet name. The pieces above seemed to shed petals over everything, a wordless, lovely requiem for a ceremony that would never happen. Lila stood stunned, adrift in a tide of lace and wreckage, moored only by the tempest burning in Avery Sloane's eyes. Part 2. The Substitute Bride. The hush after Avery's sentence wasn't mere quiet. It was a vacuum pulling the air from the garden. Lila looked at Avery, the sharp planes of her face wavering behind a sudden hot glaze of tears. You don't deserve this, but he doesn't deserve you either. The line reverberated, a strange counterpoint to the ghostly strains of the abandoned processional. Still humming in Lila's head, shame acid and thick surged through her, hotter than the sun hammering her bare shoulders. Her painstakingly crafted glow felt like cheap paint splitting under inspection. A low susurrus rose through the guests, a crest of confusion and scandalized thrill. Hisses sharpened into bits of speech. Avery Sloane. What's she Logan's sister? Is this some prank? Poor Lila. Cameras first lowered in awkward pity snapped back up, lenses drinking in the spectacle with greedy focus. Lila felt those stares as pressure on her skin. Her bouquet, once a token of joy, turned to dead weight. She wanted to sink into the pristine runner, disappear beneath the drift of pieces petals. Her eyes shot toward the blank space under the arch, then back to Avery's storm-gray gaze. Fierce and unreadable. What? She whispered. The sound cracked and faint, failing under strain. Avery didn't flinch. She stepped closer, breaking the fragile bubble around Lila. Her nearness was both daunting and oddly steadying in the churn. She offered no comfort, only a line flung from pure, unfiltered audacity. Marry me, Avery said. Her voice wasn't tender, wasn't dreamy. It was crisp, clipped, and edged with steel, slicing the ambient noise. It was the cadence of a CEO sealing a high-stakes deal, not a lover's plea. Lila's brain sparked and stalled. The absurd, breathtaking madness of it struck like a blow. A choked, wild laugh rose from her chest, breaking into a sob that twisted halfway into stunned disbelief. Tears ran down her cheeks, carving tracks through perfectly said makeup. Are you out of your mind? She burst louder than planned, the echo hanging in the garden's hush. A fresh ripple of whispers crested at her flare. Avery's mouth tipped. Not a smile, more a grim admission. Her focus never left Lila. Yes, she said, flat and unashamed. She leaned in a fraction, her tone dropping again. Intimate and intense even with an audience, but not as crazy as letting you leave this aisle with your pride smashed to dust, for him to grind later. Her glance cut to the empty groom's place, then returned, pinning Lila. Let them shoot this. Let them talk about us. Not you stranded here, not his cowardice. Let the headlines fix on our choice, on defiance and nerve, on a news story written in real time, while yours remains intact, unbroken, untouched by his absence and the mess he made today. The raw pragmatism of it, the brutal assessment of her utter vulnerability struck Lila with shocking clarity. Avery wasn't offering love or solace. She was offering a shield, a weapon, a way to flip the script on the humiliation. Salvage operation, Lila's reeling mind supplied. Hostile takeover of a ruined wedding. The weight of the stares intensified. She could feel the pity, the morbid curiosity, the whispers like insects crawling on her skin. Walking away felt like admitting defeat, confirming she was the abandoned, pitiable figure. Staying felt impossible. But Avery's offer, it was madness, yes, but it was also action. It was defiance. It was a chance to reclaim some semblance of control from the wreckage. Lila looked into Avery's stormy eyes, searching for deception, for mockery. She saw only fierce determination and a chillingly calculated resolve. In that moment, the path of least resistance, the path of abject humiliation, felt infinitely more terrifying than leaping into the unknown with Logan's enigmatic, dangerous sister. A strange calm born of utter desperation washed over her. The hysterical laughter subsided. She took a shaky breath, squared her shoulders beneath the heavy lace and silk, and lifted her chin. Her tears-streaked face was pale, but her voice when it came was surprisingly steady, carrying clearly to the front rows. "Yes," Lila said. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Cameras clicked furiously. Avery didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes. Satisfaction, anticipation. She gave a single sharp nod. Lila turned towards the officiant, who stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape, his prayer book clutched like a shield. His face was a mask of bewildered horror. "Father Elias," Lila prompted, her voice trembling only slightly. "I believe we're ready." The priest blinked rapidly, looking from Lila's resolute, tear-stained face to Avery's implacable one, then out at the sea of stunned guests. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. This is highly irregular," he stammered, fumbling with the pages of his book. Avery stepped smoothly forward, positioning herself where her brother should have stood. She ignored the priest's discomfort, her posture radiating an authority that demanded compliance. Irregular circumstances require irregular solutions. "Father," she stated coolly, "proceed. We have vows to exchange." She held out her hand, not for Lila to take, but a silent command for the ceremony to begin now. Father Elias Quinn, flustered and clearly out of his depth, looked helplessly towards the wild appearance. Logan's mother had buried her face in her hands. His father stared straight ahead, stony-faced, finding no rescue. The priest swallowed hard, adjusted his robes, and opened his book again. His voice, when he began, was thin and ready, stumbling over the familiar words as if reading them for the first time. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." He started the traditional opening now imbued with surreal absurdity. Lila faced Avery, the woman who had just proposed marriage as a strategic maneuver, the sister of the man who had shattered her heart minutes ago. The pine overhead still shed petals delicate and doomed onto Avery's severe black shoulder. Lila clutched her bouquet, her knuckles white again, but this time not with joy. This time with a white-knuckled grip of someone clinging to a life raft. In a stormy, unpredictable sea, she had said yes to madness. Now she had to stand there and pretend this was the plan all along. The string quartet, catching on with bewildered professionalism, tentatively began playing again. The music now a haunting, uncertain accompaniment to the most unconventional wedding march ever witnessed. This isn't a publicity stunt, this is our life. Part 3. The morning after marriage. Sunlight, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, painting geometric patterns across the impossibly vast expanse of dove-gray carpet. Lila woke not with a start, but with a slow, disorienting unspooling of consciousness. The scent wasn't her familiar lavender linen spray, but something rich and foreign: sandalwood and expensive coffee beans. The sheets weren't her soft cotton blend, but a cool, slippery river of silk that whispered against her skin and the weight on her left hand. Unfamiliar, heavy, cold. She blinked, lifting her hand. The ring caught the sunlight, throwing fractured rainbows onto the pristine ceiling. It wasn't the delicate diamond solitaire Logan had slipped onto her finger months ago. This was a band of heavy platinum set with a single large flawlessly cut emerald, deep cool green like a forest pool. Avery's ring, the physical proof of yesterday's surreal, breathtaking insanity. Memory crashed over her like a rogue wave. The pieces, the silence, the crushing weight of abandonment, the sea of shocked faces, and then Avery, a dark, avenging angel cutting through the pastel ruin, offering not solace, but a bold option. "Marry me." The feel of Avery's surprisingly strong, cool hand gripping hers during the truncated vows. The priest's bewildered, trembling voice, the the stunned, almost reverent silence of the crowd as Avery slid that emerald onto her finger, acclaiming not a promise. A choked sound escaped her throat, half sobbed, half hysterical laugh. She was married to Avery Sloane, her almost sister-in-law, in front of 200 witnesses, a string quartet. And God, the sheer absurd audacity of it made her head spin. She buried her face in the impossibly soft pillow, inhaling the faint, lingering trace of Avery's icy perfume. What had she done? The quiet click of a door opening snapped her head up. Avery stood framed in the doorway, leading to what Lila presumed was a dressing room or an office. She was already fully dressed, a vision of controlled elegance in charcoal gray slacks that fell in perfect lines, and a crisp white shirt untucked, the sleeves rolled precisely to her elbows. Her dark hair was damp, slicked back, emphasizing the sharp lines of her cheekbones and the cool, assessing gaze she leveled at Lila. No trace of yesterday's stormy fury remained on the surface. This was pure polished granite. "You're awake." Avery's voice was calm, matter of fact, as if commenting on the weather. She held to large steaming mugs. "Coffee black for me." I took a guess. "Oat milk latte. Extra shot." She didn't wait for confirmation. Crossing the vast space with that same predatory grace she'd used to stride down the aisle, she placed one mug on the sleek low nightstand beside Lila. Lila pushed herself higher against the mound of pillows, gripping the silk sheet to her chest like armor. The ivory lace of her wedding dress carefully lifted away last night by a quiet, efficient woman Avery had called hung over a minimalist chair in the corner. A ghost of yesterday's calamity. She glanced from the coffee to Avery, her mind still scrabbling for footing. "You guessed right," Lila managed, voice rough from sleep and stifled feeling. She reached for the mug, warmth seeping into chilled fingers. The scent was rich, promising the clarity she craved. She took a careful sip. It was dangerously good, smooth, perfectly balanced, the sort of coffee that felt like a luxury, a sharp contrast to the emotional minefield she was standing in. Avery leaned against the wide windows, sipping her own black coffee, gaze pinned not to Lila, but to the glittering city unfurled below. Morning light carved her profile in stark relief. "Good. We need to talk strategy." Her tone was crisp, businesslike. Lila stared at her. Strategy, as if they'd merge firms, not lives. In the most spectacularly public derailment imaginable, the absurdity bubbled up again, tempered by a flicker of irritation slicing through the shock. She took another longer pull of the latte, letting caffeine and the sheer audacity of Avery's stance brace her. "You mean," Lila said, voice gathering strength threaded with a sarcasm she hadn't known she possessed about the fact, "I married my almost sister-in-law in front of 200 people. Half of them probably live tweeting, or that my actual fiancé is God knows where, possibly laughing his head off. Or maybe the small detail that I woke up in a penthouse. That likely costs more than my entire life savings married to a woman whose idea of a romantic proposal was, let's weaponize this humiliation." She set the mug down with a decisive click on the nightstand. "Sure, Avery. Let's start there. Strategy away." Avery finally turned, gray eyes locking with Lila's furious blue. There was no apology in that look, no softness, only a cool analytical focus. A slight near-invisible tilt of her head acknowledged the flare. "All valid points," Avery said, voice free of irony, strictly pragmatic. "But dwelling on the emotional fallout is a luxury we don't have. The press is already camped downstairs. Social media is predictably on fire. Your parents have called my assistant 17 times." She took a slow sip of coffee. "We made a spectacle yesterday. Today we control the narrative. That's step one." Lila wrapped her hands around the warm mug again, borrowing its solidity. The anger still burned, a hot coal in her chest. Yet Avery's frosted practicality felt like an anchor. Control the narrative. It sounded clinical, detached from the raw, bleeding mess inside her. Still, the alternative was to be swallowed by the scandal, reduced to the woman left at the altar. "So," Lila asked, quieter now, edged with weary curiosity. What does controlling the narrative look like? Besides, she gestured vaguely at the opulent room in her own rumpled state. Waking up here, Avery's lips curved. Not a smile, but the look of someone about to outline a complex merger. It looks like presenting a united front. It looks like confidence, not confusion. It looks like making it abundantly clear that Logan Sloane's departure was the best thing that could have happened to you. Her gaze sharpened, pinning Lila. It looks like us, Lila, forged in fire perhaps, but unbreakable. Starting with a joint appearance later this morning, Lila absorbed this united front. Confidence us. The words felt alien, dangerous. Yet the image of facing the vultures alone, of being pitted and dissected, was far worse. Avery had thrown her a lifeline made of thorns yesterday. Today she was offering a suit of armor equally sharp. The question was, could Lila bear its weight? She looked down at the emerald on her finger, catching the light. A symbol of revenge, strategy, defiance. Not love, never love, but perhaps for now it was enough. Okay, Lila said, meeting Avery's gaze again, a spark of determination kindling beside the fear and fury. Strategy it is. Where do we start? She picked up the latte, the dangerous, delicious coffee, suddenly tasting like fuel for the battle ahead, the battle Avery had declared, and to which she had inexplicably, irrevocably said yes. Part 4. The Press Conference Wife. The lobby of Wilder Tower wasn't just grand, it was intimidating. Soaring ceilings of steel and glass, polished black granite floors reflecting harsh fluorescent light, and the low constant hum of power and purpose. It felt like stepping into the belly of a sleek, modern beast. And today, the beast was restless, a roped-off area near the main entrance seed with activity. Camera crews jostled for position, lenses pointed like weapons towards a simple podium bearing the Wilder Tech logo. Reporters clustered, microphones bristling, voices overlapping in a low anticipatory buzz that echoed off the hard surfaces. The air crackled with the scent of coffee, stale perfume, and the raw hunger for a scoop. Lila stood just out of sight in a private elevator lobby, her reflection staring back from the polished chrome doors. Avery had dressed her, not asked. Dressed her in a tailored sheath dressed the color of storm clouds. Cinched at the waist with a thin obsidian belt, sleek, sophisticated, expensive armor. Her hair was pulled back into a severe low knot. Her makeup flawless and subtly formidable. She looked powerful. She felt like an imposter wrapped in silk and strategy. Avery appeared beside her, a monochrome vision of control in a perfectly fitted black suit. Her white blouse stark against it. She assessed Lila with a quick professional glance. Nerves. Lila took a shaky breath, smoothing the non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Only about 1,000 reporters waiting to dissect the most humiliating moment of my life. And the insane sequel. Good. Channel it. Not fear. Contempt. Avery's voice was low, cool. They're relentless. We're in control today. Remember the narrative. United. Defiant. Better off. She held out her hand, palm up, not offering comfort, but demanding alliance. Ready? Lila looked at the offered hand, then at Avery's implacable face. This was the first test, the first step in Avery's strategy. Taking that hand felt like signing a contract in blood, but the alternative, facing that feeding frenzy alone, was unthinkable. She placed her hand in Avery's. The grip that closed around hers wasn't gentle. It was firm, unyielding, anchoring, possessive. Ready, Lila lied, forcing steel into her voice. They stepped out together. A wave of sound hit them. Shouts, the rapid fire clicking of dozens of cameras, the blinding glare of flashes. It was overwhelming. Lila instinctively flinched, but Avery's grip tightened. A silent command to hold. Avery didn't flinch. She strode towards the podium. Lila pulled smoothly in her wake, radiating an aura of absolute, unassailable authority. The flashes intensified, capturing the stark contrast. Avery, dark and commanding. Lila, pale but poised in her storm-gay armor, the unfamiliar weight of the emerald band glinting coldly on her finger. Avery stopped at the podium, releasing Lila's hand, only to slide her own arm around Lila's waist, pulling her close. It wasn't an embrace. It was a statement. "She's with me, accept it." Lila leaned into the touch, not out of affection, but necessity. Avery's body was a solid wall against the chaos. The questions erupted before Avery could even lean towards the microphone. "Miss Sloane, is this marriage legal? Lila, how do you feel marrying your fiancé's sister? Where is Logan Sloane? Was this planned? Is it a publicity stunt? Avery, are you retaliating against your brother?" Avery waited, her expression impassive, letting the cacophony swell for a few excruciating seconds. Then she lifted her free hand. The gesture was small, but the room fell into a tense, expectant silence. She leaned towards the microphone, her voice crisp, amplified, cutting through the air. "Yes," she stated, the single word dropping like a stone. "We are married." A collective gasp followed by a fresh frenzy of clicks. She paused, letting the confirmation hang, then continued, her tone glacial. "No, my brother is not invited to dinner." A ripple of shocked laughter quickly stifled. "This isn't a publicity stunt, this is our life. Any further questions about Logan Sloane's whereabouts or motivations are irrelevant to us." Lila kept her face carefully composed, a serene mask trained on a point just above the sea of reporters. She could feel the intensity of their stares, the hunger for a crack in her facade. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. Avery's arm was a steel band around her. A reporter near the front shoved a microphone forward. "Lila, can you comment? Is this a marriage of convenience or love?" Lila felt Avery's subtle pressure against her side. "Speak." She turned her head slightly towards the microphone. Avery angled towards her, offering a smile that felt brittle but looked radiant under the lights. "Love," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady, "can take many unexpected forms." She let the enigmatic statement hang, then added, "Sometimes the most surprising paths lead you exactly where you belong." She leaned back, the picture of serene conviction. Another reporter shouted, "Avery Sloane, this seems incredibly sudden and frankly bizarre. What do you say to critics calling this a desperate stunt?" Avery's grip on Lila's waist tightened almost imperceptibly. She didn't look at the reporter. Her gaze swept the room, coldly dismissive. "I say my personal life is none of their business. But since you asked," she paused, a predator surveying its territory. "Lila Moreno is brilliant, resilient, and possesses more grace under fire than anyone I've ever met. Marrying her was the least bizarre decision I made yesterday. The most bizarre was trusting my brother to show up." Her delivery was flat, factual, the insult delivered with surgical precision. A murmur ran through the crowd. Lila maintained her smile, turning her face fractionally towards Avery as if sharing a private moment. Between gritted teeth, barely moving her lips, she whispered, "Are you always this subtle, Avery?" Still facing the flashing cameras, didn't miss a beat. Her own lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smirk, visible only to Lila. Her response was a low, intimate murmur meant only for her wife's ears, perfectly timed as cameras captured their seemingly affectionate closeness. "No, a beat. Usually I'm worse." She straightened, her expression smoothing back into cool authority. "That's all for today. Thank you." She didn't wait for more questions. With the same decisive grace she'd shown walking down the aisle, Avery turned, keeping her arm firmly around Lila, and steered her away from the podium, back towards the sanctuary of the private elevators. The shouted questions followed them, a final barrage against their retreating backs. But they walked as one, a united front forged in the crucible of scandal, leaving a stunned silence and 100 exploding headlines in their wake. The performance was over for now. Part 5. The Office Reveal. The polished chrome doors of the private elevator slid open, not onto another plush lobby, but onto the nerve center of Avery's empire. Wild Tech's executive floor was a landscape of cool minimalism. Vast open-plan spaces segmented by walls of frosted glass. The low thrum of serve as a distant heartbeat beneath the hushed, intense quiet. The air smelled of ozone, expensive coffee, and unspoken pressure. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating floating staircases and sleek work pods where figures in sharp muted attire moved with focused purpose. Avery stepped out first, a silhouette of absolute authority against the gleaming backdrop. Her black suit was armor, her stride purposeful, radiating ownership of every square inch. Then she paused, half-turned, and extended her hand back into the elevator. Lila took it, her palms slightly damp against Avery's cool, dry grip. Stepping out beside Avery onto the hushed executive floor felt like stepping onto a stage. Under blinding spotlights, she was acutely aware of the stark contrast she presented. Avery had vetoed the storm gray sheath for this outing. Instead, Lila wore a tailored dress in a vibrant teal that felt like a dare, a splash of defying color against the monochrome efficiency. Her hair was down now, a cascade of blonde curls that felt rebelliously alive. The heavy emerald on her finger was a glaring, undeniable statement. The effect was instantaneous. A woman balancing a stack of reports froze mid-stride, her eyes widening comically. A man speaking low into a headset stopped dead, the words dying on his lips. Conversations at sleek glass desks stuttered into silence. Heads turned not subtly but with open slack-jaw astonishment. The low thrum of the floor seemed to hiccup, replaced by a vacuum of pure shocked stillness. It was the kind of silence that screamed. Avery didn't acknowledge it. She merely tightened her hold on Lila's hand and set forward, drawing Lila smoothly beside her. Her posture was regal, her gaze pinned ahead, sweeping the floor as if inspecting her own. Utterly untouched by the seismic ripple her present San Lilis was creating. The click of Avery's stiletto heels on polished concrete cracked like sharp drumbeats. In the unnatural hush, gasps, sharp and audible, trailed in their wake. Whispers flared like sparks catching dry tinder. "Is that but Logan's married yesterday?" the feed said, Avery's wife. Lila kept her chin lifted, a serene smile affixed to her face, mirroring Avery's cool mask of indifference while her senses ran hyper-alert. She felt the heft of every stunned stare, caught every hissed syllable, saw frantic messages being thumbed beneath desks. She was an anomaly. A live grenade rolled into the meticulously ordered world of Wild Tech, and Avery was the detonator. Together, they rewired the room's gravity, tilting every gaze and breath toward them utterly in one synchronized stride. As they slipped past a cluster of sleek meeting pods, a young executive fumbled and dropped his phone. The clatter was thunderous in the quiet. Avery did not so much as glance. Lila, however, met his wide, horrified eyes for a heartbeat and offered a small, decorous nod. He looked ready to faint. They took a turn, entering a long corridor bordered by offices with names etched across frosted glass. VPS, directors, amazed. The murmurs intensified, ricocheting off the glass walls. Avery finally eased her pace, leaning infinitesimally toward Lila. Her voice, a low murmur meant only for that ear, yet somehow carrying intimate confidence through the charged air. "You're parading me," Lila whispered back, the smile never leaving her lips, though her eyes held a keen teasing dare like a particularly scandalous prize. Avery's mouth curved into the faintest and most dangerous hint of a smile. She didn't look at Lila. Her gaze skimmed the corridor ahead where more heads were poking from doorways, like startled prairie dogs. Parading implies no purpose. She kept her tone cool, deliberate. She squeezed Lila's hand, a possessive punctuation mark. "I'm debuting my wife." She paused, letting the word wife vibrate in the stunned quiet around them. It's a different sort of power move. The implication was transparent. This wasn't only about scandal or defiance. This was Avery staking a claim not merely on Lila, but on the narrative inside her own dominion. Presenting her wife, the woman her brother had jilted, was a masterstroke. It announced her victory in the familiar war, displayed her audacious control, and simultaneously shamed Logan's memory within the very halls he had once expected to inherit. It was a message to every employee, every executive. See who holds power now. See who dares. They arrived at a massive pair of double doors at the Carter's end, Avery's inner sanctum. Amazed simply, Avery Sloane, CEO, her assistant, a man with the unflappable calm of a seasoned combat veteran, stood waiting, holding the door wide. His eyes flicked across Lila with professional neutrality, revealing nothing. Before stepping in, Avery halted. She turned not toward her office, but back down the corridor where dozens of eyes scrambled to pretend they hadn't been staring. She lifted her chin, a queen addressing her court. "Good morning," Avery said, her voice carrying without effort. "This is Lila Moreno Sloane, my wife. She'll be a frequent presence here." She paused, letting the title and the statement sink in, her gaze sweeping the frozen tableau. "Carry on." Then, without waiting for a response, she guided Lila through the imposing doors into the stark, powerful expanse of her office. As the doors clicked shut behind them, sealing them off from the electric silence of the corridor, Lila finally let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The performance was over. The message had been delivered, detonated with brutal precision. Avery had debuted her wife, and Wild Tech would never be the same. Part 6. Secrets and Sharp Tongues. The sushi bar Avery chose wasn't just expensive. It was an experience sculpted from shadow-polished wood, and the silent ballet of the chefs behind the gleaming counter. They sat at the end of the pristine Hanoi counter, isolated in a pool of low light. The air hummed with quiet conversation and the rhythmic shank of knives against fish. It felt like a sanctuary worlds away from the glaring lights of the press conference and the electric shock waves of Wild Tech. Lila watched me as the master chef deftly layered translucent slices of amberjack over perfectly formed nuggets of seasoned rice, his movements economical reverent. Avery beside her seemed equally absorbed, her profile sharp against the dark wood backdrop. She'd shed her suit jacket, revealing the stark white shirt, sleeves still rolled up, exposing the clean lines of her forearms. The emerald on Lila's own hand caught the subtle light, a constant, heavy reminder. They'd navigated the first case courses with surprisingly easy, if surface-level conversation-safe topics like the architecture of the bar, the providence of the uni, the absurdity of paparazzi hiding in dumpsters. Avery was sharp, witty in a dry, cutting way, and Lila found herself relaxing fractionally, lulled by the exquisite food and the illusion of normally. The sake, smooth and deceptively potent, warmed her veins, loosening the knots of tension that had become her constant companions. Then came the tutorial, fatty tuna belly, melting like butter on the tongue. Avery sat down her delicate porcelain sake cup with a soft click that seemed louder than it should have been. She didn't look at Lila, her gaze fixed on the glistening fish on her plate. The playful banter evaporated, replaced by a sudden, dense silence. It wasn't altruism, Avery stated, her voice low, but cutting cleanly through the ambient hum. No preamble, no softening, just the stark truth delivered like a blade. Lila froze, the delicate flavor turning to ash in her mouth. She'd known, of course, on some level the strategic marriage, the power moves, the calculated press conference. Avery Wilder didn't do things without a ruthless purpose. But hearing it stated so boldly in this intimate space felt like a physical blow. She carefully placed her own chopsticks down. "What wasn't?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Avery finally turned her head. Her gray eyes, usually so cool and assessing, held a storm of something darker, old, festering bitterness, a sharp edge of triumph, and a terrifying intensity. "Stepping in, marrying you." She picked up her sake cup, swirling the clear liquid, watching it cling to the sides. It served a purpose, a very specific one. Lila waited, the silence stretching, filled only by the chef's rhythmic knife work. She could feel the chill emanating from Avery a cold counterpoint to the warmth of the sake. My father, Avery, began, the word dripping with icy disdain, handed Wild Tech, the company I built from a garage startup into a contender, while Logan partied his way through trust funds to my feckless, undeserving brother. Her knuckles whitened around the sake cup simply because Logan carried the Y chromosome. Because he was the son, she took a slow sip, the action deliberate, controlled. A legacy company for a legacy disappointment. The raw venom in her voice was startling. Lila had seen glimpses of the sibling rivalry, the tension, but this was a deep poisoned well. So Avery continued, her gaze locking onto Lila's, pinning her in place. I built something else. Bigger, better, wilder holdings. Built it out of pure, unadulterated spite. Brick by ruthless brick. Deal by crushing deal to prove him wrong. To prove them all wrong. A cold, predatory smile touched her lips. And then Logan did the one useful thing has ever managed. He abandoned you at the altar in front of half the city's elite. Lila flinched, the memory still raw. The public humiliation of fresh sting. It was perfect. Avery said, the word devoid of warmth, a gift-wrapped opportunity. Marrying you wasn't just salvaging your dignity, Lila. It was the ultimate humiliation for Logan. Taking what he discarded, elevating it, braiding it as mine. It was shoving his failure and my success in his face and my father's every single day. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur that sent shivers down Lila's spine. Despite the warmth of the room, it was proving that everything he throws away, I can transform into gold. Everything he breaks, I can make stronger. Especially the things he was too blind, too stupid to see the value in. Lila felt the words land like physical blows. She was a pawn, a beautifully dressed, publicly adored pawn in Avery's war against her family. The exquisite sushi churned in her stomach. The penthouse, the clothes, the fierce protection. It was all part of the strategy, part of the revenge. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her own sake, the alcohol burning a path down her throat, trying to quell the rising tide of hurt and anger. She'd known, but hearing it. And now you, Avery said, her voice shifting. The icy bitterness didn't vanish, but it was overlaid with something else, something warmer, almost appreciative. Her gaze swept over Lila, not with assessment this time, but with a kind of fierce possession. Standing beside me, facing down the press with more grace than seasoned politicians. Walking into wilder tech like you own the corridor. A pause. Her eyes, for the first time since Lila had known her, seemed to soften at the edges. The storm momentarily clearing. You are the most exquisite piece of karma I've ever delivered to my brother's doorstep. She raised her sake cup in a tiny, ironic salute. Beautiful, resilient, and entirely devastatingly mine. The word karma echoed in the space between them. It was a weaponization. It stung. Yet wrapped within it lay beneath the brutal honesty of her role. As revenge incarnate was something else. A raw, unexpected admiration. Avery saw her strength, saw her value, saw her as a weapon. Yes, but a beautiful one, a devastating one. Lila studied the emerald ring, no longer merely a token of a reckless accord, but of her place in a bitter family war. She was vengeance separated cold on a bed of pristine sushi. The hurt throbbed with a strange defiant thrill. She was durable. She had faced them down. And Avery, the engineer of this turmoil, noticed it. Used it. Yes, yet noticed it. She met Avery's gaze again. The storm still there, but now laced with something unsettlingly close to esteem. Lila lifted her chopsticks. Her hands steadied despite the churn inside. She chose a piece and dipped it lightly in soy. Karma, huh? Lila murmured, her voice soft but firm. Holding Avery's unwavering eyes, she raised the sushi to her mouth. Taste suspiciously like high-grade wasabi. She took the bite, the clean, piercing burn, a counterpoint to the layered bittersweet realization hovering in the air between them. The game was exposed. Now Lila only had to decide how to play her role. Part 7. Lines blur. The penthouse terrace was Avery's field of cool control. Low modular seating in tones of charcoal and slate, geometric planters of sculptural succulents, and the vast glittering sweep of the city spread like a circuit board below. Tonight it carried a different current, the low thrum of a small exclusive gathering. Wilder Holdings executives, sleek investors, and a scattering of Avery's sharp-elbowed peers mingled. The clink of crystal and the hum of high-stakes conversation braided with the distant city drone. Lila moved through it like a practice player now, the teal dress replaced by a column of midnight silk that clung and shimmered. She laughed easily, handled pointed questions on synergy and market disruption with surprising wit, and charmed a notoriously tricky venture capitalist with a tale of disastrous college art projects. She was inhabiting the part Avery had drafted, the dazzling, compelling wife, an asset to the empire. Avery watched from across the terrace, resting against the glass rail, a tumbler of costly bourbon balanced loosely in her hand. Her typical aura of contained command held, but beneath it simmered something unsettled, an energy she couldn't quite bank. Watching Ela truly glow, not merely perform, had become a dangerous fixation. It wasn't just tactics anymore. It was a relentless draw. Every flicker of Lila's real smile, every spark of her quick mind chipped at the fortress walls Avery had spent years raising. The revelation over sushi, the blunt confession of revenge, had opened a rift. Still, Lila hadn't run. She'd adapted, flourished, even turning the weaponization into a kind of strength of her own. It was infuriating. It was exhilarating. Logan's old fraternity brother, Colby Mercer, swayed up to Avery, his grin too wide, his eyes already glassy. Wilder still tossing quakes. "I see." He gestured loosely toward Lila, who was now neatly extracting herself from the venture capitalist. "Never pictured you settling down, especially not with His chuckle carried implication. Logan's leftovers. Avery's knuckles blanched on her glass. The insult to Lila, casual and cruel, struck a nerve she hadn't known was bare. Heat flared along her spine, immediate and uninvited, cutting through the bourbon haze like a blade to bone and nerve. "Careful, Colby," she said, her voice dangerously soft, devoid of its usual icy precision. "Your ignorance is showing." Ethan, emboldened by bourbon and old arrogance, missed the warning. He leaned in conspiratorially. "Come on, Avery. We all know the score. Strategic alliance, right? Brilliant move, crushing Logan. But let's be real, the Ice Queen doesn't do warm and fuzzy." He waggled his eyebrows. "Bet you haven't even kissed the poor girl properly. All business, right?" Just like always. The taunt hung in the air, thick and stupid. Avery's gaze snapped from Ethan's smug face to Lila, who had just caught her eye. A questioning tilt to her head. Something primal, fierce, and terrifyingly beyond strategy roared through Avery. "Prove it." The words echoed in her head. Not Athens, but her own demons. Prove this wasn't just cold calculation. Prove she wasn't just the Ice Queen. Prove that Lila Moreno was hers in every conceivable way, including this. Avery pushed off the railing. She didn't walk. She stopped. The crowd seemed to part instinctively before her focused intensity. Lila, sensing the shift, turned fully towards her, her expression shifting from polite curiosity to weary surprise as Avery closed the distance. There was no hesitation, no preamble. Avery reached her, one hand sliding possessively around Lila's waist, pulling her flush against her before Lila could even gasp. "Avery," Lila started, confusion wearing with the sudden, unexpected heat of Avery's body against hers. Avery didn't speak. Her free hand came up, fingers tangling in the soft silk of Lila's hair at the nape of her neck, tilting her face up. Her gray eyes, usually so controlled, were storm dark, turbulent, holding Lila's wide, startled gaze for one endless electric second. There was no strategy in that look, only raw, undeniable want. a hunger that obliterated everything else. The party, the guests, the revenge plot, the carefully constructed walls. Then Avery kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was acclaiming a collision. Her mouth was hot and demanding on Lil's, silencing any protest, any question. The taste of her bourbon, and something uniquely fiercely Avery flooded Lily's senses. The world narrowed to the pressure of Avery's lips, the possessive grip at her waist and in her hair, the hard line of Avery's body against the softness of her own silk dress. It was fire and ice, fury and surrender. Adair answered with terrifying intensity. Lila froze for heartbeat, shocked rigid, then instinct overrode thought. A low moan vibrated in her throat, swallowed by Avery's kiss. Her hands, which had been hanging limply at her sides, flew up, not to push away, but to clutch at the crisp fabric of Avery's shirt, anchoring herself as her knees threatened to buckle. The kiss deepened, turning desperate, searching a frantic unraveling of every pretense, every carefully maintained boundary. The cool night air, the murmur of the party, the glittering city below. It all vanished. There was only the shocking, all-consuming reality of Avery's mouth, her touch, the dizzying sense of free fall. When Avery finally broke the kiss, pulling back just enough to breathe, it wasn't a release. It was a suspension. They were inches apart, breathing raggedly, staring at each other in the dim terrace light. Avery's eyes were wide. The storm momentarily stilled, replaced by pure, unguarded shock. Her lips were slightly swollen, her usual composure utterly shattered. Lila's face was flushed, her lips tingling, her blue eyes dazed, reflecting the city lights and the utter devastation of the kiss. The silence around them was profound. Colby Mercer stood frozen, his smug grin replaced by slack-jaw astonishment. Others nearby stared openly, cocktails forgotten. Avery seemed oblivious. Her gaze was locked on Lila, seeing her anew, not as a pawn, not as revenge, but as the woman who had just unraveled her completely. "You, Avery," breathed, her voice rough, unfamiliar. "You were never part of the plan." The words were an admission, a surrender, a dawning horror at the depth of her own miscalculation. Lila's fingers were still clenched in Avery's shirt. Her own breath hitched. The taste of Avery was still on her lips, the heat of her body imprinted on Lila's skin. The hurt, the strategic maneuvering, the revenge plot. They hadn't vanished, but they were momentarily drowned out by the seismic aftershock of that kiss. A shaky, breathless laugh escaped her, tinged with wonder and a terrifying sense of inevitability. "Neither," Lila whispered back, her voice trembling but clear, "was falling for my fake wife." The admission hung between them, fragile and monumental. The carefully constructed edifice of their marriage of convenience lay in ruins at their feet, shattered by a single, reckless kiss born from a dare and detonated by something far more dangerous. The terrifying, undeniable possibility of something real. The city lights blurred as Lila stared at the woman who had married her for revenge, realizing the greatest act of vengeance might just be the one Avery had unwittingly committed against her own guarded heart. Part 8. The Family Fallout. The annual Vidian Tech Gala was less a party, more a gladiatorial arena draped in black tie and billion-dollar valuations. Crystal chandeliers cast cold, brilliant light on a sea of power suits and couture gowns. The air thrummed with a low roar of deal-making disguised as conversation. The clink of champagne flutes like the clash of ceremonial swords. Lila stood near a towering ice sculpture sculpted into the shape of a crashing wave, a silent metaphor for the industry's volatility. She wore emerald green tonight, a deliberate echo of the ring on her finger, a silent declaration. Avery, a panther in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, stood beside her, radiating an aura of controlled dominance. They were a unite, a force, until the universe tilted. A ripple went through the crowd near the grand entrance. Murmurs sharpened, heads turned. Lila felt the shift before she saw the cause. Avery went rigid beside her, her hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her champagne flute. Logan Sloane pushed through the parting crowd. He looked like he'd stepped out of a fashion spread for disgraced air. Impeccably dressed in a midnight blue tux, his blonde hair artfully tousled, a practiced, charming smile plastered on his face. But the charm didn't reach his eyes. They scanned the room, hungry and desperate, landing squarely on Lila and Avery. He moved towards them with a swagger that felt brittle, a performance for the circling sharks. "Lila," he announced, his voice artificially loud, cutting through the ambient noise. He stopped a few feet away, ignoring Avery completely. His gaze fixed on Lila with an intensity that felt possessive, delusional. "You look breathtaking." He held out a hand as if expecting her to take it to step away from Avery. "I've been a fool. A colossal idiot. Seeing you tonight, it's clearer than ever. We need to talk alone." The sheer audacity stole Lila's breath. The humiliation of the altar. The weeks of silence. The public implosion of her life reduced to a foolish mistake he could smooth over with a tuxedo. And a smammy compliment. Fury, cold and sharp, replaced her initial shock. Avery didn't move. She didn't speak. She simply watched her brother, her expression utterly blank, a terrifying void where fury should have been. The stillness radiating from her was more unnerving than any outburst. Lila found her voice icy and precise. "There is nothing to discuss. Logan, you made your position abundantly clear. On our wedding day," she didn't take his hand. She didn't move an inch closer. Logan's smile faltered. He dropped his hand, his eyes darting nervously to the rapt audience surrounding them. Cameras, sensing blood in the water, were already jostling for position. "Lila, please," he implored, the desperation leaking through the charm. That was a panic attack, a moment of weakness. "I love you. I always have this." He gestured vaguely at Avery, finally acknowledging her presence with a contemptuous flick of his eyes. "This farce, it's beneath you. Come home where you belong." "Where you belong?" The words were a slap, as if she were a misplaced object he could reclaim. As if Avery, the woman who had stood beside her, fought beside her, kissed her with a soul-shaking intensity, was nothing but a temporary aberration. Before Lila could unleash the scathing retort, burning her tongue, Avery moved. It wasn't a step forward. It was a seamless predatory glide that brought her directly in front of Logan, forcing him to finally meet her gaze. The void in her eyes ignited into a confirmation of pure chilling fury. The air crackled with it. The crowd collectively held its breath. "Home." Avery's voice was a low, dangerous purr that somehow carried to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. "You lost the right to define where she belongs when you left her standing alone, in front of 200 people. You lost the right to speak her name when you chose cowardice over commitment." She tilted her head, a predator examining prey. "You lost everything, Logan, including any claim to her attention." She didn't shout. The quiet lethality was far worse. Logan flushed, his jaw clenching. "This is between me and Lila. Avery, stay out of it." Avery's lips curved into a smile devoid of warmth, a baring of teeth. "Oh, but I'm very much in it." She turned her back on him, a deliberate, brutal dismissal. Her focus shifted entirely to Lila. The transformation was instantaneous. The icy fury directed at Logan melted, replaced by something infinitely more complex, more terrifying. Avery's gaze locked onto Lila's intense, possessive, and blazing with an emotion that went far beyond strategy. It was a challenge, a promise, a declaration. In one fluid motion, Avery closed the distance between them. Her hand came up, not roughly, but with deliberate certainty, cupping Lila's jaw. Her thumb brushed Lila's lower lip, a whisper of contact that sent an electric jolt through them both. Time seemed to stop. The gala, Logan, the flashing cameras, the gasping crowd, it all faded into a blur. Then Avery kissed her. It wasn't the desperate, unraveling kiss of the terrace. This was different. This was performance and possession intertwined. It was deep, lingering, and utterly deliberate. Avery poured every ounce of defiance, every shred of victory, every confusing, overwhelming surge of genuine feeling into it. Her mouth moved against Lila's with a slow, devastating certainty, claiming her not just in front of her brother, but in front of the entire world. Her free arm slid around Lila's waist, pulling her flush, eliminating any space between them, presenting a united front forged in fire and sealed with this very public, very passionate act. Lila didn't hesitate. The shock was momentary, swept away by a tidal wave of fierce answering possession. She kissed Avery back, her hands sliding up to grip Avery's shoulders, anchoring herself in the storm. The taste of Avery, the familiar heat, the dizzying sense of brightness. It was all there, amplified by the context, by the defiance, by the sheer, breathtaking audacity of it. She met Avery's passion with her own, a silent vow transmitted through the searing contact. I am here. I am yours. The kiss lasted an eternity and a heartbeat. When Avery finally pulled back, it was slow, deliberate. She kept her forehead resting against Lila's for a beat, their breaths mingling, a silent communion in the eye of the hurricane. Then she turned, her arms still firmly around Lila's waist, facing the stunned room, and her brother, who stood frozen, his face a mask of humiliated rage and utter disbelief. Avery didn't speak. She didn't need to. The kiss had been the declaration. The message was received. Lila was unequivocally, irrevocably hers. Logan had been erased from the narrative. Avery guided Lila smoothly away from the ice sculpture, away from Logan, through the parting crowd that erupted into a cacophony of whispers and frantic camera clicks. They moved as one, radiating an aura of invincible unity. The sleek black limousine was a welcome sanctuary. The door closed, sealing them in plush silence. The muffled roar of the galading. Lila leaned back against the cool leather, her heart still hammering against her ribs, her lips tingling. She turned to Avery, who sat beside her, staring straight ahead, her profile sharp in the passing city lights. The intensity of the kiss still hung heavy in the air between them. You, Lila said, her voice a mixture of awe, residual adrenaline, and sharp awareness. Do realize you just declared war, right? Full scale. No holds barred war on your brother, on your father, on the entire Wilder legacy. She gestured towards the tinted window, towards the fading spectacle of the gala. That wasn't just a kiss. That was a tactical nuke. Avery finally turned her head. The fierce possessiveness of the ballroom was gone, replaced by a profound, bone-deep satisfaction. A slow, dangerous smirk spread across her face, illuminated by the flickering streetlights. There was no triumph over Lila, but over the battlefield itself. She reached out, her fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from Lila's temple, the touch unexpectedly tender after the public firestorm. No, darling, Avery murmured, her voice low and thick with the resonance of absolute victory. Her eyes held Lila's, reflecting the city's glow and the certainty of her next words. I won it. Part 9. Real Vows. The air hummed differently here, not the high, strong tension of their first disastrous wedding day, nor the charged performative energy of their press conferences, or Avery's power plays at Wild Attack. This quiet garden, tucked behind the penthouse they now shared, breathed serenity. Sunlight, gentler now in the late afternoon, dappled through mature oak leaves onto an arch woven not with imported peonies and stiff silk ribbons, but with climbing jasmine and fragrant honeysuckle. Lila had nurtured herself. It smelled of earth, growth, and quiet promise. Lila stood facing Avery, her simple ivory linen dress whispering against her legs. Gone was the elaborate gown, the trembling bouquet of shock and humiliation. In her hands she held a single perfect white rose, its petals soft against her skin. Avery, usually a study in sharp lines and controlled power, looked softer, too. Her tailored suit was replaced by dark flowing trousers and a silk blouse the color of twilight. Open at the collar, her strong gray eyes held a depth Lila had learned to navigate, a depth now filled with a quiet certainty that stole her breath. The efficient, a warm-faced woman who knew their unconventional story, smiled gently. You've chosen to write your own vows. Lila, whenever you're ready. Lila took a steadying breath, her gaze locked with Avery's. The past year flashed behind her eyes. The blinding pain of abandonment, the bewildering shock of Avery's proposal, the sharp tang of revenge, the slow, terrifying thaw of walls built for survival, the unexpected warmth blooming in the wreckage. Avery, she began, her voice clear but thick with emotion. That day under the pieces, I thought my world had ended. I was sunshine, you said with my heart wide open, and it felt shattered on the marble floor. Then you stepped forward, not with pity, but with a challenge. You offered me shelter in the storm, even if it was a fortress built on spite. A tear traced a path down her cheek, but she smiled through it. You rescued me from utter ruin. You gave me a shield when I had none. And then you tricked me into this wild, chaotic alliance, tricked me into seeing the world through your fierce, uncompromising eyes, tricked me into finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. She reached out her free hand finding Avery's. But the greatest trick, the most beautiful con you ever pulled, was making me fall in love with you. You loved me fiercely, Avery, not as a pawn, not as revenge made flesh, but as me, the messy, sometimes too bright, resilient me. You loved me better, deeper, and with more terrifying honesty than anyone ever has. You saw the cracks in my sunshine and didn't flinch. You filled them with something stronger. You are my unexpected sanctuary, my fiercest protector, and the love I never dared to plan for. I choose you, Avery Sloane, not for strategy, not for revenge, but for the forever you've shown me as possible. A profound silence followed, broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant chirp of a bird. Ava's throat worked as she visibly gathered herself. The sharp edge of her usual composure was softened, her eyes suspiciously bright. She squeezed Lila's hand, her grip anchoring. Lila Avery's voice was lower, rougher than usual, carrying the weight of unaccustomed vulnerability. My plan was simple, elegant, even. Take what was denied, build higher, make them choke on their own choices. Revenge was the fuel, the blueprint, the only language I understood. She paused, her gaze tracing Lila's face, the tear tracks, the unwavering love in her eyes. You were never part of that plan. You were collateral damage in my brother's cowardice, a variable I hadn't accounted for. Taking his place, that was strategy. Protecting you, that was necessity. Seeing you stand tall when the world expected you to break, that was inconveniently compelling. A ghost of her old smirk touched her lips. You walked into my fortress of spite, Lila heart, trailing sunlight and chaos. You challenged my every calculation, softened my sharpest edges without ever asking permission. You looked at my carefully constructed walls of ambition and revenge and saw me hiding behind them. And you stayed. Avery's voice dropped to a near whisper, thick with emotion. You made revenge taste like redemption. You turned my battlefield into a home. You took the weapon I forged against my family and melted it down into something infinitely more precious. She lifted their joined hands, her thumb brushing over Lila's knuckles. They thought they broke something that day. They broke nothing. They merely cleared the path for the most brilliant, unexpected merger of my life. You are my victory, Lila. Not over them, but over everything cold and calculated I thought I was. You are my beautiful, radiant karma. Yes, but more than that, you're my heart's unexpected, perfect, and only sovereign. I choose you, Lila, wholly, finally, without a single hidden agenda, except loving you for the rest of my days. Tears streamed freely down both their faces, now unchecked. The efficient, blinking rapidly herself, barely managed the formal pronouncement through the palpable wave of love and relief that washed over the small gathering. As the words, "You may kiss," hung in the air, Avery didn't wait. She cued Lila's face, her touch reverent, and kissed her with a tenderness that held the echoes of every challenge, every secret, every fierce protection, and every surrendered wall. It was a kiss that sealed not just a marriage, but a hard-won peace. A love forged in the fires of the vows they didn't plan, finally consecrated under the arch they chose together. Part 10. The Wife She Chose. The sleek glass tower of Vakya Ventures, Avery's meticulously built empire. A gleaming middle finger to wilder tech, hummed with a different energy now. It wasn't just the aggressive buzz of ambition anymore. It was laced with creativity, warmth, and the occasional jarringly bright laugh that echoed down the minimalist quarters. Chaos, meticulously managed chaos, had become their brand. Lila Moreno Sloane, she'd hyphenated with defiant glee, strode into the expansive PR bullpen, a whirlwind of color against the chrome and slate gray. Her office, once a sterile meeting room Avery had grudgingly allocated, was now a vibrant haven. Mood boards plastered with bold campaigns competed for space with framed photos. Their small garden wedding, a silly selfie on a private jet. Avery looking adorably disgruntled wearing a novelty PR hat Lila had forced on her. A half-eaten artist anal donut sat beside a stack of crisis management reports. Nadia Chen Lila called, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her assistant desk. The specs for the Vidian launch, and remind legal we need sign off on the eco impact claims by noon. Avery won't tolerate greenwashing even if it costs us a quarter point in projections. Her voice was warm, but carried an authority that hadn't existed on that sun-drenched, heartbreaking day. Under the pieces, she'd learned strategy from the best, but infused it with her own brand of empathetic brilliance. Down the hall, behind a door that bore only the starkly elegant monogram RW, Avery surveyed the holographic display of global market fluctuations. Her sharp suit was impeccable, her expression the familiar mask of calculated intensity. But the eyes that scanned the data held a subtle warmth, a grounding certainty that hadn't been there before. A discreet chime sounded, the special alert for her wife. Meeting ran late. Sushi, the place with a blasphemously expensive uni. Lila's message popped up, accompanied by a gift of a dancing avocado roll. A ghost of a smile touched Avery's lips. Only if you promise not to steal the wasabi again. Boardroom 3:10 minutes. Need you on the Neuralink acquisition call. Graham Whitaker's being obtuse. On my way prepping my charm offensive. Bring your scary CEO face, came the instant reply, followed by another gift. A kitten trying to look fierce. 10 minutes later, Lila slipped into the boardroom radiating calm confidence. Avery sat at the head of the table, the picture of intimidating authority. As Graham Whitaker's hologram droned on about valuation concerns, Avery caught Lila's eye. A silent conversation passed between them. Lila gave an almost imperceptible nod. Avery leaned forward, her voice like chilled steel, slicing through the virtual air. Mr. Graham Whitaker, your concerns are noted. However, our valuation isn't based solely on current assets, but on the exponential growth potential unlocked by our market penetration and brand trust spearheaded by the best PR mind in the sector. She gestured subtly towards Lila. Perhaps Mrs. Moreno's loan can elucidate the consumer confidence metrics. Our recent campaigns have achieved numbers even your analysts couldn't ignore. Lila seamlessly took the baton, her voice smooth, persuasive, weaving data into a compelling narrative about brand loyalty and future-proofing. She didn't overpower, she illuminated, making Avery's ruthless logic undeniable. Graham Whitaker sputtered. Avery hid her satisfaction behind a sip of water. It was a dance they'd perfected. The velvet glove over the iron fist, the sunshine cutting through the storm. Later, over that outrageously expensive sushi, Lila did steal the wasabi, earning a mock glare. Avery pushed a small velvet box across the table. Inside wasn't jewelry, but a sleek custom-designed comms earpiece. For when your charm offensive needs tactical support. Avery deadpanned. Lila laughed, the sound bright and clear. Is this your version of romance? Upgrading my corporate espionage gear. Call it ensuring my greatest asset is optimally equipped. Avery countered her gaze, softening. You turned Vicky's image from ruthless disruptor to innovator with heart. That's not PR, Lila. That's alchemy. Their life was a whirlwind of launches, galas, strategic coups, and the quiet moments in between. The penthouse smelled of Lila's vanilla candles and Avery's expensive espresso. Movie nights involved fierce debates over action flicks versus rom-coms, usually ending with Avery conceding, grumbling about unrealistic meet cuties while pulling Lila closer. Boardroom victories were celebrated with champagne and kisses that sometimes lingered a little too long for corporate decorum. And inevitably at events, the question would arise, usually from some star journalist or a curious socialite. How did you two meet? It must have been something incredibly romantic. Lila would always turn to Avery, a spark of shared history and wicked amusement in her eyes. She'd take Avery's hand, her thumb brushing over the platinum band that matched her own. "Oh, it's quite the story." She'd begin, her voice warm but laced with the steel she'd honed. "You see this one?" She'd nod towards Avery. "Married me to ruin her brother." A collective gasp usually rippled through the listeners. Lila would smile, bright and genuine. Then she'd continue, her gaze locking with Avery's storm gray one, full of love and shared triumph. "She loved me to ruin her plan." Avery would just grin then, a slow, predatory, utterly satisfied smile that held a universe of meaning. She'd squeeze Lila's hand, her voice a low, confident purr that cut through the murmurs. "Best hostile takeover I've ever done." And as they'd walk away, Lila's laughter mingling with the clink of glasses and the hum of conversation. It was clear they hadn't just built an empire of business and love. They'd rewritten the rules, forged their own kind of chaos, and chosen each other fiercely. And finally, in every boardroom, in every quiet moment, as the wives they were always meant to be together. They weren't just partners. They were the unstoppable force and the brilliantly radiant object perpetually in each other's orbit.